If you've ever trusted someone with your whole heart only to watch them walk away with your entire future in their pocket, hit that like button. Subscribe if you believe that betrayal doesn't get to write the final chapter, because what I'm about to tell you proves that sometimes the person who destroys you becomes the exact reason you build yourself into someone unstoppable. My name is Kennedy. I'm 31 years old. And the worst Christmas of my life became the foundation for the best revenge I never knew I needed. But before I tell you about the moment I stood on the other side of those bars looking at the man who ruined me, let me take you back to where this story really begins, because every act of justice starts with a wound that refuses to heal quietly. I was 22 years old when I met Dominic Pierce at a community college party I almost didn't attend. I was studying criminal justice, working part-time at a grocery store, and living in a tiny studio apartment that smelled like the Indian restaurant downstairs. My life was small but mine, built on scholarships and determination after aging out of foster care at 18. I had no family, no safety net, no one to call when things fell apart. Just me and a bank account I'd been feeding $20 at a time since I was 16. Dominic seemed like magic wrapped in a leather jacket. He was 25, confident, and had this way of making you feel like the only person in a crowded room. He worked in sales, he said, something with telecommunications that sounded important when he explained it after 3 beers. We started dating 2 weeks after we met. He'd show up at my apartment with takeout, listen to me talk about my classes, and tell me I was going to be an amazing cop someday. For someone who'd spent most of her childhood bouncing between foster homes where no one remembered my birthday, his attention felt like sunlight after years of winter. 6 months in, he moved into my studio apartment. It made sense financially, he said. He was between places and we were together all the time anyway. I ignored the voice in my head that whispered warnings. I ignored the fact that he never quite had money for rent but always had money for new shoes. Love, I told myself, meant giving people chances. It meant trusting even when trust felt dangerous. For 2 years we built a life that looked normal from the outside. I graduated with my associate degree and got accepted into the police academy. Dominic bounced between sales jobs, always talking about the big commission check that was just around the corner. I worked double shifts at the grocery store to save money for academy expenses. Every paycheck, I'd deposit money into my savings account, watching the numbers climb slowly toward my goal of $5,000. It wasn't much, but it was everything. That money represented my future, my way out of poverty, my ticket to becoming the person I dreamed about since I was a kid watching cop shows in foster care. Dominic knew how important that money was. I'd shown him my bank statements, proud of my discipline and sacrifice. The week before Christmas, during my final month before academy training started, Dominic became strange. He'd leave the apartment for hours without explanation, came home smelling like cigarettes though he'd quit months ago, and stopped looking me in the eye when we talked. I asked him repeatedly what was wrong. He'd kiss my forehead and say he was stressed about work, about the holidays, about money. I believed him because I wanted to. On December 18th, I came home from a closing shift at the grocery store to find Dominic packing a duffel bag. My stomach dropped to my feet before my brain could catch up with what I was seeing. He looked up, startled, like he'd hoped to be gone before I returned. "What's happening?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He zipped the bag slowly, deliberately, like he was buying time to construct a lie. "Kennedy, I need to tell you something," he started, and I knew. I knew before the words left his mouth that my life was about to shatter. "I took money from your account. I need to leave town for a while." The room tilted sideways. "Took money," I repeated stupidly. "How much?" "All of it," he said, finally meeting my eyes. $4,900. I felt my knees go weak. I grabbed the doorframe to stay upright. "That's my academy money. That's my entire future." "You can't." "I know," he interrupted, slinging the bag over his shoulder. "And I'm sorry. But I owe some people money. Bad people. If I don't pay them back, they'll hurt me." I stared at this man I'd loved for 2 years, this man I'd trusted with everything including my bank card for emergencies, and saw a complete stranger. "You stole from me," I said, my voice growing stronger with rage. "You committed a crime." He had the audacity to look annoyed. Don't be dramatic. We're together. What's yours is mine. That's how relationships work. No, I said, my hands shaking. That's how theft works. I'm calling the police. His face changed then, twisted into something ugly I'd never seen before. You do that, and I'll tell them you gave me permission. It's my word against yours. Who do you think they'll believe, Kennedy? A foster kid with no family or a guy with a clean record and a good explanation? The cruelty in his voice broke something inside me I didn't know could break. He walked past me, out the door and out of my life, taking with him 2 years of savings and every ounce of trust I'd managed to build since childhood. I stood in that empty apartment, surrounded by the life we'd built together, and screamed until my throat was raw. Then I called the police anyway. The officer who responded was kind but realistic. He took my statement, looked at my bank records showing Dominic's name on the account as an authorized user, and delivered the news I already knew was coming. Miss Kennedy, he said gently, because he had access to your account, this became a civil matter. You'd need to sue him. We can't arrest him for theft if you gave him legal access. But I didn't give him permission to take everything, I protested weakly. Can you prove that, he asked. Couldn't. I'd added him to my account 8 months earlier when he said it would make paying bills easier. I trusted him with my ATM PIN. I'd believed his promises that we were building a future together. My naivety had given him the keys to destroy me. The officer left me with a case number and advice to contact a lawyer. I sat on my apartment floor surrounded by Christmas decorations we'd put up together and cried until I had nothing left. The next morning I went to the bank. They confirmed what I already knew. Dominic had withdrawn the money in 3 separate transactions over 5 days, staying just under the threshold that would trigger extra scrutiny. He'd planned this carefully, methodically. This wasn't a desperate mistake. It was a calculated theft. I couldn't afford the police academy without that money. The tuition was due in 3 weeks. I'd already quit my job to focus on training. My landlord had just raised my rent. I had $400 left in my checking account and a future that had disappeared overnight. I spent Christmas alone, eating ramen noodles and trying to figure out how to rebuild a life from ashes. I called the academy and explained my situation, my voice cracking with humiliation as I detailed my stupidity and betrayal. The administrator was sympathetic but firm. Without tuition payment, my spot would go to someone on the waiting list. I had until January 15th to come up with the money or defer for a year. A year felt like a lifetime when you were already 24 and starting from nothing. But I'd learned something growing up in foster care. You can either let circumstances destroy you, or you can use them as fuel to become indestructible. Chose fire. Took 3 jobs. I worked overnight stocking shelves at a warehouse, morning shifts at a coffee shop, and evening shifts doing data entry from my laptop. I slept 4 hours a night. I ate the cheapest food I could find. I canceled my internet, my phone plan, everything that wasn't absolutely essential. Every single dollar went into a new bank account at a different bank, one Dominic had never touched. And every night, as I forced my exhausted body through another shift, I thought about his face when he'd said those bad people would hurt him. Hope they did. By January 10th, I'd saved $2,000. It wasn't enough. I was still $3,000 short with 5 days until the deadline. I sat in my apartment, defeated and furious, when my phone rang. It was Officer Bryant, the cop who'd taken my report about Dominic. Miss Kennedy, he said, I have some information you might want to hear. Dominic Pierce was arrested 3 days ago in Nevada for credit card fraud. Multiple victims. He's looking at serious charges. My heart stopped. Is there any way I can get my money back? I asked, hating how desperate I sounded. That's the complicated part, Bryant said. Most of the money's gone. But there might be another option. The Nevada prosecutors are building a case. Your testimony about him stealing from you could help establish a pattern of behavior. It won't get your money back immediately, but it strengthens their case significantly. I gave my statement over the phone to a Nevada detective named Torres. I sent bank records, text messages, emails, everything that proved Dominic had systematically planned to rob me. Torres called me back 2 days later. Miss Kennedy, your information was incredibly helpful, he said. We're adding your case to the charges. He's likely looking at 5 to 7 years. The satisfaction I felt was cold and sharp. Good, I said. One more thing, Torres added. There's a victim restitution fund. It takes time, sometimes years, but you might eventually recover some of your money through court-ordered payments. Eventually, I wasn't going to pay my academy tuition in 3 days. I thanked Torres and hung up, staring at my laptop screen showing my bank balance. $2,000. 3 days. No options left. Then my phone rang again. This time it was the academy administrator, Mrs. Fletcher. Kennedy, I've been thinking about your situation, she said. I spoke with the board. We're prepared to offer you a payment plan. Put down what you have now, and pay the rest over your first year as a cadet. Your instructors reviewed your application. They think you have real potential. We don't want to lose you over circumstances outside your control. I started crying right there on the phone. Ugly, grateful tears that came from somewhere deep and wounded. Thank you, I managed to say. Don't thank me yet, she said with a smile in her voice. Thank me for becoming the kind of officer who makes this decision look smart. I started the academy 3 weeks later, running on determination and rage in equal measure. The training was brutal. Physical conditioning that left me gasping, legal procedures that made my brain hurt, scenarios that tested every assumption I had about justice and mercy. But I'd spent my whole life fighting for every single thing I had. The academy was just another battle, and I'd learned how to win those. I graduated 18 months later, 6th in my class, with commendations for crisis intervention and investigation procedures. The day I put on my uniform for the first time, I looked at myself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked strong, capable, like someone who could protect others because she'd learned how to protect herself. My first assignment was patrol in the downtown district, responding to calls, learning the streets, and understanding how law enforcement actually worked outside of textbooks. I was good at it. Really good. I had this way of talking to people that came from understanding what it felt like to have nothing and no one. I could de-escalate situations because I knew what desperation looked like from the inside. 3 years into patrol, I applied for the detective division. I wanted to work on financial crimes, specifically fraud and theft cases. My lieutenant asked me during the interview why I was so passionate about that particular specialty. Because I know what it's like to be robbed by someone you trust, I said honestly. And I want to be the person who makes sure those people face consequences. I got the position 2 months later. For the next 4 years, I built cases against con artists, embezzlers, identity thieves, anyone who made their living by exploiting trust. I was relentless. My closure rate was among the highest in the department. Criminals started to know my name, and not in a good way. I'd forgotten about Dominic, pushed him into a corner of my mind reserved for old wounds that had scarred over. Then one November morning, 7 years after he'd walked out of my apartment with my future in his pocket, I got a call from dispatch. Kennedy, we've got a situation downtown. Guy tried to run a credit card scam at Maxwell Electronics. The manager caught him, held him until we arrived. Officers brought him in about 20 minutes ago. He's asking for his phone call. You're up for processing. I grabbed my jacket and headed downstairs to the holding area, my mind already running through standard procedures. I walked into the processing room, looked up at the man sitting in handcuffs, and time stopped. Dominic Pierce sat there, 7 years older and worse for wear. His hair had thinned. His face had lines that hadn't been there before. His expensive taste in clothes had degraded to a wrinkled shirt and jeans that had seen better days. But it was unmistakably him. He looked up as I entered, recognition hitting him like a physical blow. His face went white. Kennedy, he whispered. Detective Walsh, I corrected coldly, letting him see my badge, my gun, my authority. I picked up the paperwork the arresting officer had started, forcing my hands to stay steady. Dominic Pierce, charged with credit card fraud, attempted theft, and providing false identification to a merchant. He just stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish drowning in air. I didn't know you were a cop, he finally said. Why would you? I replied, my voice professional and detached. You stole my life savings and disappeared 7 years ago. A lot can happen in 7 years. Apparently including you becoming exactly the kind of person I now arrest for a living. He leaned forward, desperation creeping into his voice. Kenny, please. Don't call me that, I snapped, my professional mask cracking slightly. You lost the right to use that name when you robbed me. He swallowed hard. Look, I know I messed up back then. I was young and stupid and desperate. But I've been trying to turn my life around. This today was a mistake. A mistake, I repeated, looking at his file. According to this report, you used 3 different stolen credit card numbers trying to purchase $2,000 worth of electronics. That's not a mistake. That's a pattern. The manager caught you because you've done this before at other stores. There's security footage from 4 different locations over the past 2 months. You're not trying to turn your life around, Dominic. You're just still stealing from people. His face crumpled. I need help, Kennedy. I have a gambling problem. I owe money to some dangerous people. The same excuse he'd used 7 years ago. The same words that had convinced me to give him access to my bank account, to trust him with my future. Except this time, I wasn't a naive 22-year-old girl desperate for love. I was a detective with handcuffs and authority. That's unfortunate, I said calmly. But it's not my problem. It's yours. And now it's the court's problem. What happens next? He asked, his voice small. I explained the process with clinical precision. He'd be formally charged, see a judge for arraignment, and bail would be set based on his criminal history and flight risk. Given that he had multiple warrants from Nevada, unpaid restitution from previous fraud convictions, and no permanent address, I suspected bail would be set fairly high. His face went even paler. How high? Probably $50,000, I said. Which means you'd need to come up with $5,000 cash to a bail bondsman. He looked at me with something that might have been hope. Kenny, Detective Walsh, please. Can you help me? Can you talk to the judge, explain that we have history, that I'm not a bad person. I just made bad choices. I stood up, gathering the paperwork. You're right. You did make bad choices. And one of those choices was stealing $4,900 from someone who trusted you. Do you know what I did after you left? I asked, my voice hard. I worked 3 jobs. I slept 4 hours a night. I ate ramen for 8 months straight. I paid my way through the academy one painful dollar at a time because you decided your gambling debts were more important than my future. So no, I won't be speaking to the judge on your behalf. He looked at me like I'd slapped him. That's not fair. Life isn't fair, I said, echoing words a foster care worker had told me when I was 12 and asking why I couldn't go home. You taught me that lesson, Dominic. I'm just making sure you finally learn it too. I processed him through the system exactly by the book, documented every charge, and wrote a detailed report about his previous fraud conviction in Nevada. When his arraignment came 2 days later, I sat in the courtroom and watched the judge review his extensive criminal history. The prosecutor mentioned his outstanding warrants, his failure to pay previous restitution, his lack of stable employment or residence. The judge set bail at $75,000. Dominic's face crumpled as the bailiff led him back to holding. He looked at me one last time before disappearing through the door, and I felt absolutely nothing. No satisfaction. No revenge. Just the quiet certainty that sometimes the universe has a way of putting people exactly where they need to be. After the hearing, the prosecutor, a sharp woman named Valeria Brooks, approached me in the hallway. Detective Walsh, she said. I reviewed your report. You did excellent work on this case. Thank you, I replied. She hesitated. I also saw the note about your history with the defendant. That took guts to disclose. I could have left it out, I said. But I don't operate that way. Brooks nodded approvingly. That's exactly the kind of integrity we need. Actually, I wanted to talk to you about something. We're forming a specialized white-collar crime task force. Financial fraud, identity theft, complex scams. I've been watching your work. You'd be perfect for it. The promotion would mean a pay increase, better hours, and the chance to work bigger cases. I thought about 22-year-old Kennedy, sobbing on her apartment floor, convinced her life was over. I thought about the woman I'd become, built from those broken pieces into something stronger than she'd ever imagined possible. When do I start? I asked. Brooks smiled. After Dominic Pierce's trial. I want you to testify about the pattern of behavior. Your case helps establish his long-term fraudulent activities. 3 months later, I sat in a witness box and told my story under oath. The defense attorney tried to make me look vindictive, suggesting I was biased because of our history. But the evidence spoke louder than any bias. Bank records, text messages, a documented pattern of theft and fraud spanning nearly a decade. The jury convicted him on all charges. He got 6 years. As they led him away, he looked at me one last time. I'm sorry, he mouthed. I nodded once. Not in forgiveness but in acknowledgement. He was sorry I believed that. Sorry he got caught. Sorry his choices finally caught up with him. Sorry that the girl he'd robbed had become the detective who'd helped put him away. But sorry didn't pay back what he'd stolen. Sorry didn't give me back those years of struggle. Sorry was just another word for too late. I got promoted to the white-collar crime task force the following month. My salary doubled. I bought a small house with a yard and a mortgage that was mine. I started sleeping full nights again without nightmares about empty bank accounts. And sometimes late at night, I'd think about Dominic in prison and wonder if he'd finally learned that other people's trust isn't a resource to exploit. I'd probably never get back the money he stole. The restitution payments were sporadic at best. But I'd gotten something better. I'd gotten proof that the worst thing that ever happened to me had been the catalyst for becoming someone I was proud to be. If this story reminded you that betrayal doesn't get to write your ending, smash that like button. Subscribe for more stories about justice, redemption, and becoming the person who no longer needs anything from the people who broke them. Drop a comment about a time someone's cruelty became your motivation. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't destruction, it's transformation. See you in the next one.
Thank you for watching. If you enjoy watching Karma, Payback, come full circle every week, we dive into tales of betrayal and poetic justice. Don't miss the next one. Tap the subscribe button and join the Revenge Squad.